Everyone, today is the first session of a series which we're calling Using the Work Sampling System to Support Intentional Teaching. And our focus today will be on using assessment to build relationships. Next slide. So thank you very much for coming. Thanks, Pearson, for hosting the series. And thanks to all of you for taking the time to be with us this afternoon. So to begin, I want to cite a quote from Asa Hilliard. He said this quote at a conference many years ago before he passed away. And the quote is, "Relationships matter more than anything else. Human beings need to be nurtured." Whoops. Human beings need to be nurtured. Teachers must nurture in ways that tap into the genius of each child. Take a moment to just look at the photo on this slide. The teacher's Rachel. Notice how she holds Sammy. She places her hand gently on his head. Her facial expression conveys warmth and caring, and even though Sammy can't see it, he can feel through her body her concern. Her actions convey connection and relationship. Positive relationships between teachers and children are the foundation for children's exploration and learning. So the reason we're focused on relationships today is that sometimes in an effort to do everything that we're expected to do in early childhood classrooms, and in an effort to do assessment, fail to remember that assessment is designed to help us build stronger and more positive relationships with children. When children trust, they take on new challenges, demonstrate persistence, and ask questions when confused. Look at Haley as she interacts with this child who's petting the dog. There she is at the child's eye level. She sort of envelops the child just with her body. Relationships come from interactions. All interactions have an impact. How we feel about ourselves, and how and what we learn. Sometimes, whether we're adults or children, we come away from an interaction feeling a little more self-confident and a little more competent. On the other hand, sometimes we come away from an interaction feeling a little demoralized and deflated. While sometimes an interaction can leave us feeling smarter and wiser, other times we can end up feeling a bit dumb. Some interactions are simply a vacation for the brain, a chance to just laugh. But all interactions have the potential to affect us. And so much so, those between teachers and children. Teachers' interactions with children affect how they feel about themselves and how they learn. So let's look at some research on relationships and learning. Bowman and her colleagues talked about how the quality of teacher-child relationships influences children's achievement in school. Morrison said that when teachers establish emotionally secure relationships with children, these relationships contribute to children's engagement in school. And Ridley and colleagues said when teachers show more positive emotion, like Rob is doing in this photo, and sensitivity, and are less harsh and detached, young children are more likely to be engaged in the classroom. Each of these pieces of research speak to the fact that if you're familiar with the work of Pianta and his colleagues and the class, it's the reason that positive climate and relationships is the first dimension of that program assessment. So why am I focusing on relationships today as we talk about assessment? Because I believe, as does all this research, that it's pivotal for us to see assessment as a way to foster stronger relationships with children. How do we get to know children and build relationships with them? So here's Miss Maggie sitting with 4-year-old Taylor. In her way of being, she's watching and listening to learn. She's using what she learns to make a connection with children. She's looking for the cues that let us know that the invitations to connect are working. And finally, we continue, and she continues, to observe with an open mind. So what we have to think about is how can we use assessment to foster relationships? First of all, let's define assessment. Assessment are tools and processes for answering questions about children's learning in order to make informed decisions. This webinar today, our focus in the tool is the work sampling 5th edition. Process of assessment is the ongoing use of the assessment cycle. And the questions that we ask help us get to know children well, build relationships with them, and find out what they know and can do so that we can more effectively guide their learning. Let's remember that assessment in Latin means to sit beside. So I said that for assessment, it's processes to answer questions. So the process is relying on the assessment cycle. Assessment is a cyclical process that starts with asking questions about children's learning. Second step of this process is collecting evidence. The next step is making sense or interpreting that evidence. Finally, we have to take action. Historically, when we thought about the assessment cycle, thought about this cycle as going on over time. But I want to invite you to think about how the assessment cycle guides teacher-child interactions. So we're using that cycle in each interaction that we have with children. Most of you may know that a focus of my work has been powerful interactions. We define a powerful interaction as different from an everyday interaction in the following way. First, in a powerful interaction, we're intentional. Pause to think before we act. Second step of a powerful interaction is that we want to connect and remind the child of the relationship we have. And after we've paused to be present and we've made sure, notice that smile on that child's face, then we can think about what's the right way to extend this child's learning in the moment. So now let's look at this interaction from the perspective of the assessment cycle. So the teacher joins Jamila. The question that's guiding her thinking is, what does Jamila know about books and reading? Then she says, oh, hi, Jamila. I see you're reading Chicka Chicka Boom Boom. We think of assessment as part of our interaction. We enter the interaction curious to learn about the child. And each time we have that question in our mind, the collection of the evidence is just, oh, so Jamila's holding the book right side up, turning the pages from left to right. When I say, I see you're reading Chicka Chicka Boom Boom, notice I didn't ask a question, but I made a comment. Jamila says, yes, my favorite. So I've already begun to make sense of what I'm learning about Jamila, and the actions I'm taking are right here, right now. Monroe tells us that the greatest opportunity for learning lies in moments of teacher-child interaction, when the teacher can craft a learning experience that stretches children just beyond their current skill level. That sounds like the work of Vygotsky and scaffolding and the zone of proximal development. So if this moment is the greatest opportunity for learning. It's not circle time. It's not small group time. Those little moments when you get to actually watch and listen, respond to the cues that that child is giving you in that moment. So now let's break the cycle down and examine it part by part. The first step in the assessment cycle is that teachers ask questions. Well, the work sampling system provides assessment questions in each domain. I always like to think of work sampling or any structured assessment tool as an opportunity to look at all children and make sure we're looking at the whole child. It's kind of like your conscience. So I just got a question that says if I'd be willing to repeat the definition of a powerful interaction, that would be helpful. So I'm going to do it right here with Maria in this picture that you see from a kindergarten classroom. So before Maria joins this child, pauses to think, I quiet the noise in my mind. Then she says to herself, oh, this is Julio. Julio's a second language learner. I have to slow down a little as I talk to him because he can follow my English if I go a little more slowly. I get down at his eye level, and after saying hi to him, I say, oh, I see you're working with the giraffe. So step one is pause to think, connect to that child. Step two is, or connect your thinking to that child. Step two is say hi, how you doing? So often we join children and we simply just get started on the business at hand. We wouldn't do that if we were interacting with a friend. We'd say, hi, how are you? We might even say, may I join you? So here she is. She's paused to be present. She's connected. Now she begins to think about her questions. Julio's writing. So her mind goes to the domain of language and literacy. She begins to think about what are the indicators in language and literacy. She notices that he's drawing an animal. So she wants to invite him to think a little bit about scientific thinking, about observing and describing this animal. So her questions come from her assessment tool, but they're shaped by what she knows about this child. As you know, or as you now know, work sampling's performance indicators or questions are based on curriculum objectives, child outcome standards, and state early learning standards. Okay, so let's go a little deeper into this first step of the assessment cycle. We ask questions that help us to build relationships. Now, the questions I'm talking about are not the questions we ask children. I'm talking about the questions we ask ourselves. So let's just look at this picture of little Lulu. I'm going to say to myself, oh, Lulu's holding the crayon with her right hand. Lulu is leaning into her work. I wonder what's behind her decisions about what she's drawing and writing. Now, how do I link my questions with Lulu to assessment? Well, the question that I posed because of what Lulu is doing roots me into the work sampling indicators that I know relate to my questions. They just help to focus me. So what are some questions you might ask to guide observation if your goal is to build stronger relationships with children? How is this child using these materials? How will this child approach the task? Is he slow to warm? Does she get right into it? How will this child interact with me or other children who join her? Those are questions that help me get to know more about Lulu as a person. asking questions, being curious. My colleague Margot Dichtel-Miller, another author of the work sampling system, wrote a wonderful book called The Power of Assessment. She talks about how, as assessors, we need to have a stance of persistent curiosity. Here's Jess, and she's sitting beside this child. Now, some of you might say, well, she's teaching. Some of you might say she's assessing, and I'd say she's doing both. And while she's doing it, she's asking herself the question, what's happening here? Watching and listening before she even speaks. Her curiosity is guiding her stance of how to be in this moment of assessment. She's letting the child teach her. So in this case, together they're creating a number line. And her actions, she wants to convey to this child through her actions, I'm here with you, I'm interested in you. That's what's deepening the relationship. She has to be off autopilot. So she has to tailor whatever she says or does to this child in this moment. She has to be deliberate and descriptive in the feedback that she gives. Oh, okay, I see you're making a number line, and you're using the ruler to help you decide where to make the dots. In each interaction, you want the child to think as if a thought balloon is coming out of their head. I feel special when my teacher interacts. I know she cares about me, interested in my work. She wants to help me learn. For those of you on the webinar who are teachers, each time you join a child, think about how wonderful it is. What can you say or do? How can you just be with a child? Let that child know that you care and that you're interested. By showing interest, you learn about what the child knows and can do. Another colleague, Charlotte Stetson, says, in every interaction, think about what do you want to teach the child, but what is the child teaching you? So as Angela joins Talon, a 3-year-old in this moment, she thinks about what she already knows about the child. Well, she knows this child loves dinosaurs. She brings that to the observation, to the interaction, but also wants to keep her mind open. She wants to let Talon know what she sees. Oh, Talon, I see you're looking at the dinosaur book. And she's quiet to see what Talon says. Now that we've talked about how question asking begins the assessment opportunity, we move on to the second step of our process, cycle of assessment. Collect evidence. Historically, many of us thought about observing and documenting as something that happens outside of the action, that we almost have to hide from the child. What I'd like to convey in today's webinar is that this process of collecting evidence is something that you're doing with the child. Let's pause and think about what evidence means. The definition of evidence is an outward sign, an indication, something that furnishes proof. So if we think about how this child in this photo working with the balance scale, and she's adding cubes to notice how the scale moves down or up. I could take a photo as evidence, except that that photo doesn't really tell me what she knows about the scale, about weighing, about heavy or light. But if I capture some of her language or some of our back and forth conversation, then I have actual evidence. In this case, this child is a kindergartner. the teacher might actually say, after they've played around with the scale a little bit, she might say, Maya, tell me, so what do you know about how the balance scale works? I'm going to write it down so I can remember what you know and can do about balance scales. Or she might just be taking little notes as they interact. And if Maya says, Miss So-and-so, what are you writing? It's an opportunity to let the child know. It doesn't have to interrupt the interaction and extend the interaction. So step 2 of the assessment cycle is very much about collecting documentation, but collecting documentation that enhances the quality of the teaching and learning in the interim. So when we think about letting the child teach you, rather than sitting down and joining the child to teach the child, Shelley wonders, what does Marcus know about these magnetic tiles? Let's just think for a minute. Well, he's arranged some triangles together, and now he's putting a shape together, a 3-dimensional shape, and he's chosen all squares that are the same size to begin to build a cube. That's what's happening in her mind before anything comes out of her mouth. Now she notices what he's doing. Shelley says to Marvin, oh, Marvin, see, you've chosen some square to put together a cube. Right now, you're putting the sides on. She's learning about his ability to use materials purposefully, showing some eagerness and curiosity about this task. As she talks to him, let's say he looks up and responds. She's getting some information about language and literacy. He's noticing that he recognizes the attributes of these shapes, even if maybe she hasn't asked him or found out whether he knows the name of the shape square. So she's learning a huge amount about Marcus that she's combining with what she already knows in order to then make a thoughtful comment that begins to extend his learning. But by noticing what he's doing, he's validating him. He doesn't say, oh, Marcus, I like the way you're, or good job, Marcus, you're building away with those magnetic tiles. He makes sure that what she says has the element of teaching based on what the child is teaching her. So as I said, in this moment of collecting, you're also documenting. Documentation is not just a method of preserving information about children, which is, I think, what we used to think. I'm being tempted to read what's in the chat box, but I'm going to keep going and then I'm going to pause to read it. So documentation is not just a method of preserving assessment information about children. It's a centerpiece for conversations, not just with children in the moment, but with colleagues after the fact, and certainly when we share information with families. Okay, so I'm going to just comment on this question that came in, or comment. In most of these examples, was the experience set up ahead of time, or did the teachers just join the children in their work and play? What a fantastic question. So far, in every one of the pictures I've shown you so far, it's center time and the teacher has joined the child, doing whatever it is that the child is doing. And in a few minutes, I'll talk about what that might look like in terms of a structured way for the teacher to organize herself. Okay, so sticking with step 2 of the assessment cycle, or phase 2, collecting evidence, we've always talked about the importance of documenting facts. Why? Because facts help you keep an open mind. Action verbs are facts. Walked, ran, tapped, listened, watched, pointed, smiled. Quotations are so powerful. The cube is green. I want that marker. That gives you actual illustrations of children's language. Interpretations close our minds. They don't help us know what to do next. Intentions don't help us know what questions to ask. And evaluations are premature during the time we're collecting evidence. Say to a child, good job, doesn't build that child's vocabulary. If I go back one slide, I'm going to go to this one. If I say, good job, Marcus, all I've done is give him a momentary lift. But instead, if I say, Marcus, notice you're lining the edges up of the squares up against one another. Looks to me like you're making a cube. Listen to all those words and concepts you've offered him. Okay, so objective, factual information allows us to give children feedback about what they're doing. In class, which I mentioned earlier, when we talk about what a child is doing and we give them feedback, we describe exactly what they're doing. We're using what's called parallel talk. We want to make sure that we're not using interpretations because we don't want to be biased. We want to be sensitive and fair to all children. And if each time we join a child, we make sure our glasses are clean, you're giving every child a chance to surprise us anew. One of the things that's critical about assessment and about documenting facts is that we don't talk about what the child can't do. We talk about what the child can do. Now, some people say, well, that's just being positive, and that's not accurate. Listen to this. I can say the child can't hang her coat on the hook. It doesn't tell me how to teach her. But if I say, Justine comes into the classroom, she brings her coat and her backpack, she takes them off by the door, and she leaves them in a puddle. What do I need to do next? I need to remind Justine of where the coat hooks are. So I say, Justine, I see that you took your coat off. Now let's walk together over to the hook and hang it up. That's using a strength-based stance in order to guide instruction. And as far as I'm concerned, it's the primary reason we want to pay attention to facts. It gives us the cue about what we do next. Moreover, when we keep an open mind and we have this can-do attitude with all children, even the ones we don't like so much, we're more likely to build more positive, strong relationships with them. So, as I've referred, as you collect evidence, again, step 2, and you say what you see, you're observing with curiosity. You're resisting the urge to quiz or praise. Telling the child what you see him do. Oh, we have to look carefully here at Max's green brush. I can say, oh, I see you're using a lot of pressure with the brush to make your strokes thick. Or, if Max doesn't have a lot of vocabulary, I might say, oh, I see now that you've chosen to use some green paint. If he was using a fine brush, I might say, oh, I see you're using a thin brush so that you can make the more intricate details. The other day in a conversation, someone said to me, is it appropriate to use such rich vocabulary with children if they don't know what it is? And I say, yes, yes, yes. if you're familiar with the 30 million word gap, you'd be saying yes, yes, yes as well. If you're not, I recommend you Google it. I'll try to remember to post something on my website, on my Facebook page again. Our job as teachers is to use interesting vocabulary words with children because they get curious and they look up and they say, what does that mean? And so the conversation goes on and the relationship gets stronger. After we tell the child what we see, hardest habit to break, and to be quiet. Just show interest. Go back to being curious and pause to see if and how the child. So we call this mirror talk. Mirror talk is describing what you see. In powerful interactions, we call that an extend learning strategy. Let's think about how it helps to build the relationship and how it helps you with assessment. So if I say, Louisa, you're using your red paint to make thick, wide strokes. She says red. Yes, that is the color red. And your brush is going side to side. That's horizontal, as side to side. So what's happening is I have back and forth conversation. I now know that there's some evidence of listening and speaking and interacting with familiar adults. When I observe and describe what I see as I collect evidence, I'm giving children specific detailed information about what they are doing and saying, raising children's awareness of their own actions, words, thinking, and learning. And I'm encouraging children to repeat and practice learning behaviors, leading to deeper engagement. I'm exposing children to new language and vocabulary. And I'm being with them around their agenda. I see another question, and I'm going to answer it in 1 minute. So let's imagine for a minute that we're going to now have Louisa go to the block area. And what Louisa is doing in the block area is just taking the blocks off the shelf and dumping them on the floor. I have to use what I see and document it. Louisa taking blocks off the shelf, dumping them on the floor. But now I'm going to intervene. I'm going to observe and describe. I'm going to say, Louisa, I see that you've taken the long rectangular blocks off the shelf and you've placed them on the floor. I'm curious. What's your plan? Louisa just shrugs. So I write down that I ask the plan, Louisa shrugs. But I have some data here that she heard me and she responded. Not with words, but she responded with a shrug. So then I say, Louisa, let's try together to build with the blocks. I'll put one down, you put one down. Now I'm going to go to the comment that says, especially when a student won't even attempt an activity. Now I'm going to say, Louisa, I noticed that you chose to build in the blocks. Building in the blocks means we make structures. Let's try one together. I'll put one down, you put one down. If I stay in friendly relationship mode, there are very few children who won't play with me a little bit. Even if I put one down and she puts another one down, I've gotten something to happen. If she moves on to the next thing, I say, thank you, Louisa. I enjoyed playing that. I'll come back and check on you in a few minutes and maybe we'll play some more. And I leave. The reason children don't do things is often not because they don't have the skills, but either because they feel shy, they feel angry, they're afraid of making a mistake, they don't like being with that teacher. There's all kinds of explanations. But what we're trying to document is information that helps us know what to do next. I'm going to go on, and hopefully I'll be able to address that question a little more as we continue. So now let's go to the third step of the assessment cycle, interpreting evidence. Well, in this powerful interaction or in this assessment opportunity, first I asked questions. Go back to Louisa the painter. Oh, what does Louisa know about using art materials? What does Louisa know about using tools and materials? What are her fine motor skills? What does she know about attributes and colors? Those are the questions that guide my observing. Then I begin to document my back and forth interaction with her. And as she says things, I'm interpreting, oh, she shrugged. That means she heard me. But she's not ready to use a word, so I'm going to give her a little more. Oh, I see you shrugged your shoulders. That lets me know you're saying yes. Or I'm assuming she's shrugging. So I'm interpreting the evidence right then and there in the moment to make sense of what's happening. All those formative assessment decisions. The teacher's making meaning, and that guides her with what to say. Well, let's say for a minute that Louisa's a rocket scientist, and I'm going to say to Louisa, Louisa, I see you're making horizontal brushstrokes. And she says, uh-huh. And I say, and you're layering it on top of the brown. And she says, yeah, I'm putting red on top of the brown. So I'm deciding as I hear this information what to write down. I don't have to know what it means. I just have to say, all right, I used the word layering. She used the word on top of. Maybe my moment here is to say, I used the word layering, and you said you were putting the red on top of the brown. Layering means putting on top of. That's an interesting vocabulary word. Maybe that's the essence of my teach in that moment. Okay, I'm going to go on. There's a second aspect of interpreting evidence that happens after the fact. When we study evidence and connect it to work sampling performance indicators, it helps us know the child even more and helps to foster the relationship because we use what we learn from the after-the-fact interpreting to make some decisions. This is actually right from the work sampling guidelines. So this is Dahlia, and in this example, 5-year-old Dahlia, the interaction led to the notes. So the teacher said, if one car has 4 tires and 2 cars have 8, how many tires do 3 cars have? Well, first Dahlia drew 3 cars, and she drew the tires. And then she counted all 12. And she put the plus sign in between. And so the teacher said, what does the plus mean? And Dahlia said, to see what does something, like equal, you make a plus sign. And so then Dahlia said, just let me do the equal sign. And the teacher says, so now, and then they go on and they add another one, and she says, what's the total number of tires? And Dahlia says 16, and she writes it. She reverses the 6. She sounds out and writes the word tire. So that's what happened in the interaction, and at each step along the way, the teacher is deciding, based on what Dahlia is doing, whether to leave something alone or whether to follow up on it, which direction to go in. After the fact, when she looks at her evidence, she says, oh, look, This observation that I took, just by being curious, just by being in the moment, gives me information about two different personal social indicators, one language and literacy indicator, and two mathematical thinking indicators. So the takeaway message here is that interpreting evidence happens at two different times, one during the interaction and one after the fact. I appreciate the comment that Jacqueline made about how we have to remember that learners show us what they know and can do in so many different ways. It's almost like a catch. It undermines our ability to really look at all the ways children show us what they know and can do. Okay, so when we talked about asking questions and we talked about collecting evidence, we were in the moment. When we moved to interpreting evidence, we talked about interpreting evidence in the moment, and we talked about interpreting evidence after the fact. Interpretation of evidence in the moment is designed to help you stay connected to the child's agenda. The more you're connected to the child's agenda, the stronger the relationship. Remember that slide at the beginning with the thought balloon coming out of the child's head. My teacher's interested in me. My teacher cares about what I have to say. The minute we push a child down a path that's not the child's path, the thought balloon's going to change to go away now. So the purpose of interpreting evidence in the moment is to maintain that connection. The interpretation after the fact, for the purpose of this webinar about relationships, is to say, oh, wow, tomorrow I might want to say to Dahlia, yesterday we ended up counting the tires on 4 cars. We try a bigger challenge? That says to the child, my teacher remembers me. Okay, so the question is, do you write the conversation down in the moment? And the answer to that question is, you write a little bit down. If it doesn't distract, if it helps you to pause, you write down some. You don't need to write the whole conversation. Remember, in this webinar, we're focusing specifically on actions that foster relationships. Whenever I'm with children and I write something down, and they say, what are you writing? And I say, I want to write down what you know because I want to remember it. The child's face lights up and they say, hey, write this. Okay, so I'm going to go to teachers take action now. While interacting with children, as I've been saying again and again, teachers use what they're learning in the moment to make on-the-spot decisions. So the decision about what to say to Louisa, or in this case, what to say to, I think his name is Devon, those are moments of taking action in the moment, and actions that are going to help to strengthen the connection between you. So what I want to say to you is, how do you do this? The way you do it is you say, I have 20 kids in my class, maybe 25 in a kindergarten room, or 27. You can't do this with all children every day. If you say, I have 20 children in my room, I'm going to try to connect like this with 4 children, each connection being 3 to 4 minutes long. By the end of the week, I've made sure to connect with every child, even the kids that push my buttons a little. That's what strengthens relationships. And if there are 2 adults in the room and each teacher makes a commitment to have 4 connects like this, at the end of the week you have touched children twice in a one-on-one way. You've individualized instruction and you've gathered documentation. Many teachers write down one or two things, and then before they move on to the next child, they just capture a little more. Other teachers make really quick notes, and they spend a few minutes at the end of the day kind of translating their observations of those 4 kids and entering them into work sampling online. Everybody has a different style, and there isn't one size fits all. So this few children a day, I have a slide here that this is a system that 2 teachers came up with. The top column is teacher A, and the bottom column is teacher B. So you notice that on Tuesday, teacher A is going to connect with Frankie. On Thursday, teacher B is going to connect with Frankie. So this way, each teacher has a responsibility to connect with 3 kids out of their 15 once during the day. And they actually post their observation notes up here on this chart so that they can see who they've connected with and who they haven't. And that tells them that, oops, we've missed. Next week we need to catch up with some kids. So the question from Sandra is, how many times during the week should we document? Well, want to take the streamlined path. If you really approach your interactions with children with an open mind, and you really attend to that child for 3 to 5 minutes, and you help the other kids in the room begin to understand that when you're with a child, that you might need a minute before you can help somebody else. I'm going to say that if you get one juicy piece of documentation on each child by the end of the week, at the end of the month you have 4 good ones. But at the end of 2 weeks, you're going to notice, oh, my documentation is really heavy in literacy and personal social. Next week, I really need to think about what language I'm using and when I'm observing to make sure that I'm getting some information about math. Or maybe this week, I'm focusing on mathematical thinking and my assistant is focusing on language and literacy. Okay, and then the last step, taking action, also happens when we're planning lessons. This, you review your notes and you say, so what did I learn this week about children and how can I use it? Now, I described the assessment cycle in the context of one-on-one or two-on-one teacher-child interactions. If I do those teacher interactions in week 1, and I notice that 3 or 4 kids are ready to take a leap. For example, after working with Dahlia on number sentences, I sit down and plan and I think, oh, next week, I'm going to do a small group experience around number sentences. So my documentation and my interactions may happen in a small group of me with 2 or 3 kids. So it isn't that every interaction leads to documentation or all documentation has to happen in the context of interactions. But remember, we saw that slide at the beginning of the session that said, relationships matter more than anything else. That's when children take the greatest risks. Also saw Monroe's research that said the greatest moment for learning is that moment in the teacher-child interaction when the teacher scaffolds the child's learning. So if we're going to make the most of assessment, we shouldn't be collecting a whole lot of documentation and waiting until the end of a collection period to decide what to do with it. We should be using it each day. And then, of course, another way teachers take action is when they exchange information with families. And when we're exchanging information with families, remember that curiosity comes up again, that the parent conference begins with the teacher's curiosity. She asks questions to learn more about the child, and she demonstrates respect and appreciation for the parent by jotting down the information that the parent offers. And then she shares specific knowledge about children to continue to foster that positive relation. So assessing is part of teaching. They're deeply integrated. Tips to help are reminders on the wall. You know, little mirror talks. I see that you. I notice that you. Having conversations with children, making sure you're jotting notes as you interact and that you have something to write on ready to go. Doing a few children a day and putting your questions and the children you're going to focus on right in your lesson plans. Use assessment to build relationships. Most important advice I can offer. Allow yourself to slow down. Get off autopilot a couple of times a day. Stay in the moment. Don't helicopter. Sit down. Before you say or do anything, take a deep breath and count to 10. And in order to slow down and stay in the moment, you've got to coordinate with your teaching partner if you have one. If I know that I'm going to have one-on-one interactions during center time from 10 to 10:30, then I need my teaching partner to be a floater during that time. Then I'm going to have a quick moment of eye contact with her where I'm going to indicate that now I'm going to float and she can have those interactions. Make sure you're watching and listening and giving children time to think. The more you convey, I hear you, the more your relationships deepen. When you convey to children that they matter and that you can manage interruptions, your relationships strengthen. When you use children's names, learn and use words from a child's home language, adjust the speed or the volume of your voice to fit the child, change the expression on your face to mirror how a child is feeling. You go ahead and convey to children you're building relationships. Care about them. And everything you learn in the context of that interaction is assessed. Assessment can really help you build strong, positive relationships. Remember to ask questions to get to know children. And as you collect evidence, be sure you show respect and appreciation. Oh, I noticed that the way that you're holding that paintbrush, delicate and careful to ensure that you can make fine strokes. Use what you learn from interpreting evidence to make personal and intellectual connections. Then take action, always with the goal of fostering children's competence and success. Now, miraculously, I have left a little time for questions. So I noticed that there are two. How can we get your ebook on iBooks? Well, the ebook is about coaching, and you can get it on iTunes, or you could go to the NAEYC website and look for it there, or you could just email me at judy@judyjablon.com, and I'll help you to arrange it. Question is, are trainers authorized to insert any of your PowerPoint slides into a PowerPoint, or is there a form to use to request authorization? I'm going to request that if you'd like to use any of these slides that you write to me for permission. Are there any other questions? So assessment cycles happen all day, every day. They're flexible. That's a great question. I think of the assessment cycle as something I want to internalize. And I want to think about the fact that as I go through my day, I want to have this stance of curiosity. And each time I join a child, I want to be asking questions rather than demanding information. And again, not questions that I ask of the child, questions that I'm asking myself about the child. When I ask questions about a child, and I say, what's happening here? Ooh, he's using long rectangular blocks. I let him know I see him by saying, I see you use long rectangular blocks. Now I have a good question to ask. Oh, so I wonder, do you have a plan in mind for what you're going to do with these long rectangular blocks? I'm curious. If children ask whether you like their picture, here's what I would encourage us to say. I would not use the word like. I would say what I notice. So let's just zip back for a minute. No. Oh, there we go. So let's imagine that Louisa says to me, Miss Judy, do you like my picture? What I'm going to do is I'm going to say, well, let me tell you the details I observe. And with my voice, I'm going to convey warmth and interest. I'm going to say, oh, there's so much texture. And I notice how you've layered the colors. And the blue is bold and bright. Believe me, that sounds to a child like you like it. But you've helped to fill the 1,000,000-word gap. Then I can say, what about your picture do you like? And the chances are I'm going to get some of the language back that I offered. Okay, so are there specific dates for collection periods? Yes, in work sampling we recommend kind of at the 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. You can find that out by looking at the teacher's manual online. Related to, is there a form to request authorization? I'm going to just say, what I'd like you to do is write to me and give me a sense of, what your plan is, and I will support you in that. I think that's a beautiful quote for us to end with. Each child should go home positive that they are teacher's pet. How do we use work sampling to record the interactions? First, we document our observations, and then we go online and we can translate our observations onto the checklist. This is the first of, Ramona, the chances are if you convey your enthusiasm, you can always end by saying, what's important to me is if you love it. And the police won't come if you say, yes, I love it. But what we're trying to do is really give children the language that describes their work. Yes, the 30,000,000-word gap, you can Google and read about it. There's a wonderful NAEYC article about it. Okay, I'm going to put my last slide up. So you can find me at judy@judyjablon.com. You can visit me on my website, and there's a blog that I post every 2 weeks. On Facebook, you can like my page, Judy Jablon, Early Childhood Consultant. We also have a Powerful Interactions website. It's a little bit under construction right now. The Powerful Interactions Facebook page always has some interesting information. On this slide, I put Powerful Interactions, which you can get from NAEYC, Power of Assessment from NAEYC, Power of Observation. I believe you can get that from Pearson and NAEYC, and then obviously the work sampling system from Pearson. Thank you so much for joining me today. I look forward to our next